What's up, narrators? This is Mo, and we are back with the Narratives Per Possession podcast. And I'm excited to have an afternoon session here where we get into better basketball narratives, and that's what we want to connect you to here. Today, we are going to get into the Denver Nuggets, and they just freshly attacked the Chicago Bulls last night. Disclosure, of course, I am a Bulls fan, but I'm not going to delve too much into that because I'm not surprised. But I am thoroughly surprised by how strong and resurgent the Denver Nuggets look. And before we talk about the guests I have on today, let's make sure, housekeeping wise, please like and subscribe and leave a comment on this video because that's helpful. And we definitely want that to help grow this platform. But I'm excited to talk about the Nuggets today because the guest I have today is a Denver sports analyst for Mount High Sports, and he is a co-host of the Locked On Nuggets podcast. So please like and subscribe, support those platforms as well. But without further ado, I want to bring to the stage Swipa. Thank you for joining the podcast, sir. How are you?
No, I'm good, bro. I appreciate the invite. I can't wait to get into the conversation, man.
Absolutely. Yeah. Excited to be able to have this conversation with you. And I think the timing, just be able to talk today after, we both watched that preseason game last night. That was my first time actually seeing any preseason minutes from the Nuggets. And as I say, just like overarching, I am impressed with how this roster appears to be coming together with the depth and the moves that have been made in the offseason, and want to talk about that in detail. But before we get into like sort of the big picture aspects of it, I just want to get from your sense, what were the things that popped to you last night in that preseason game, hosting the Chicago Bulls? What were the things that you took away from that?
Well, one thing is, as Chicago Bulls fans, if they are or are not aware, I have been a huge Ayo Dosunmu fan for years, and I have been advocating for Ayo Dosunmu to come to Denver for at least 3 years. He's been one of my favorite young, cheap, big guard players in the league for the last several seasons. I think a lot of people are just they're not aware of who he is unless you're really kind of in the NBA network and you're really tapped into a lot of markets, just because he's, they're not making the playoffs every year. You don't get a chance to see him at the highest level stage. He's not even a consistent starter, but he has looked phenomenal so far in preseason. I thought he looked really good. His point of attack defense was good. The scoring, him getting to the rim, even just obviously his outside jumper, I thought he looked super impressive. I've been telling the story of Josh Giddey, Chicago Josh Giddey last year, when him and Kobe White, when they were basically looking like all-stars over the course of that month when the Bulls were kind of going on that run. I think that Josh Giddey looked really good, and I'm actually really excited to see what he looks like in another year. But Matas Buzelis is the story. I think he is going to be an all-star one day. I have been high on him since he came out of the draft. 3 of 7 from 3 last night. The defense was incredible. He had 5 blocks last night, which is a huge deal, especially for a wing. And when you have weak side rim protection that is that good, and you have an athlete that can move on the wings and the perimeter like he can, that'll make things so much easier for your defense. Because obviously Vooch is not the best rim protector, but I think that Billy Donovan and what he's going to get out of this roster this year, I think they're going to be better than a lot of people think when they're fully healthy. And then you get Ayo on the court together. You get Kobe White. You get Josh Giddey. Then on top of that, I think Vooch, having another 18 in 10 season, whatever he does, I think Isaac Okoro is going to be another good get for this roster. And then you know what? Patrick Williams, obviously he's still developing, and he's not been what Bulls fans would have expected him to be a top 5 pick in the NBA draft. But hopefully he continues to turn the corner. Zach Collins is, very pesky as a big. He doesn't have a lot of great strength, but he kind of does a lot of things well. And that's the kind of player that you need. I think Dalen Terry, super long athlete. And then on top of that, you add in Jalen Smith and Noah Essengay, who's 18 years old. They have a lot of athletes. They're long, they're strong, and I think they have their own floor for having at least a good defense. And then you add in Kobe White and Josh Giddey over the top shot making. Then you have Ayo kind of the in-between game. Then you have Matas growing into the star. There's a lot to like with the Chicago Bulls. It's not, this is not where Connor Silva's intended it to be at this point in time, obviously, but I do think that this season and next season, these are going to be some huge years for Bulls and how they're developing. And I think a lot of Bulls fans should be very excited about a lot of the stuff they have on the roster.
Yeah, you can't deny the talent that's on that roster right now. And I would say, I try to keep a balance between talking about the Bulls objectively, but at the same time, I am a Bulls fan. So it's I think the thing that's I am pessimistic about the Bulls team defense at the moment, and like I'm probably not high on Isaac Okoro, to be perfectly honest. It's been a long-standing, for me personally, I've had a long-standing issue with the Bulls' approach to team defense and the roster construction to actually support that. I think there's only so much defensive juice you can squeeze out of, to be respectful, like defensively compromised players. And then at the same time, like trying to like somehow hope that you're balancing the scale by like getting a defensive player that perhaps is offensively compromised. And I think that's really my concern with Isaac Okoro specifically, that in the right matchups and right situations, he can have a defensive impact for sure. I'm not going to deny that, but I'm concerned about how so far like he's being positioned with this roster and this team where it's like, oh, we're going to put Isaac Okoro on the best player every single night. Well, okay, let's look at how that pans out. And not to get too deep in the Bulls, but like I think my concern with that really started with the immediately previous Bulls game where they're playing they were playing Giannis in the Bucks, right? And like Isaac Okoro 6'5". I don't want to see Isaac Okoro and Giannis ever. Just to be honest. So like there's the recipe there. I'm concerned about how the meal's going to look if and when Curtis Shovers gets to a prepared meal. Because he and that's the other thing too. He keeps preaching all this patience about his roster building, and at the same time, he's been running the team for 5 seasons now. And the defense has been the stick, even at the peak powers of when you had the first run of healthy Lonzo Ball and Alex Caruso on that roster. There still need to be some defensive upgrades to that team that for whatever reason, the moves that have needed to be made, they don't get made with this franchise at the moment. And I'm hoping that changes.
Yeah, I think, obviously, AK, he came from Denver, and so we have a familiarity with Arturas, and, he was very well liked by a lot of the players and, had a good reputation in the building. His vision that he's had for the roster, like I said, it hasn't unfolded yet, and I don't love the decisions that he's made. I thought he held on to DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine for too long. I thought the Wendell Carter trade for Vooch was bad at the time, just because I think Wendell kind of fit what they were looking for, which, there's 2 periods of Bulls history that I remember in the last several years most favorably. One is when you got Lonzo Ball and Alex Caruso, you had the number 1 defense and the number 1 record in the NBA for a very short time. But when they were healthy, you kind of got a chance to see like 2 guards anchoring a top-flight defense. And then 2, you had one of the best clutch defense. I think you were number 2 just a couple years ago. Remember, you had DJJ playing power forward next to Vooch, and it was working. Even with DeRozan and them on the floor, you found a way to make it work. And I think that speaks to Billy Donovan. And then obviously you had the DeMar DeRozan run where he was a 3rd-team All-NBA player, and he went on like 7 straight games of 35 or more, and he was doing everything possible as a scorer. So they have had like these peaks. The problem is the health hasn't coincided with the sustained success. And then I think your roster, because it was just so ill-fitted, you couldn't really find a way to have a truly successful path with LaVine and DeRozan and Vooch on the roster, because none of those players obviously are tier 1 players you want to build around. But I do think it's good that you finally got those players out of the building. I think the last remnant of that is going to be Vucevic. I think he's a good player, but I don't necessarily think he fits what the Bulls are actually looking for, and especially just in the development Matas and all. I just think there's more that needs to be there in the middle of the floor. Jalen Smith, again, was a cast-off. Former top 10 pick, and then kind of has redefined his career. And I think, obviously had some good moments yesterday versus the Denver Nuggets. So it is not pretty, but I do still think, and I'm looking at the Eastern Conference, and I know this is not going to be the most encouraging thing because this is where you've been the last several years. You're going to be in the play-in again, probably around 9-10. And then you're going to be battling for the Miami Heat and maybe the Milwaukee Bucks, depending on how their season goes. And, you're going to have a shot to see if you can make the playoffs this year. But a lot of that's going to come down to, are Kobe, Josh Giddey, and Matas, like, have they taken a step, and are they healthy? I think that will give you a formidable shot in that situation. But, yeah, you're still like a couple of clicks away from being able to contend in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And what I'll plug also, so actually I had on this podcast, I had Drew Stevens, who he's credentialed media on the Bulls beat as well. And so I would recommend anybody who, if these are all new things you're hearing about the Chicago Bulls, and I appreciate you really like bringing some objective perspective to that franchise. Go back and watch our Narratives per Possession podcast episode with Drew Stevens, because we talked about the Bulls at length actually, and that was fresh off of their media day. So a lot of it's just a lot of things where like that franchise, it's not a complete picture at this point, and there's a lot of feelings I have on like why is that the case and what should be done. But go check out that episode with Drew Stevens. The franchise that we are here to talk about, of course, is the Denver Nuggets. And the one thing that popped out to me about last night, actually, that I found very interesting, and I think this will be a good way of segueing into these roster moves. It was fast. If we fast forward to that second half, there's a lineup that, again, this is my first time seeing this, and maybe you've seen more of this already in some of the preceding Nuggets preseason games this season. I was very fascinated by like this jumbo lineup that David Allen put on the floor, where it was Nikola Jokic, Jonas Valanciunas, Aaron Gordon with Jamal Murray, and then Christian Braun. And it like what really popped to me was there's a possession where they go into a 2-3 zone with that giant like lineup. And what do you take away from that? Like, is that and I should say like the back context in that, I know that the Nuggets, they leaned on zone a lot in that series last season against OKC. And honestly, I think a healthier Aaron Gordon would have like helped that zone actually take him out. So I'm just like curious, like what do you take away from seeing like that move to play this big lineup? And is that going to be like a bread and butter that you expect out of the Nuggets this season?
They will definitely use it. Adelman hinted all the way back in June when all the acquisitions took place that there was a vision that Jonas Valanciunas and Nikola Jokic would play together. That is going to happen, and we've seen it now twice so far in the preseason, and I think some really key minutes. In the first one that we really saw versus the Clippers, and they put that lineup out. They played the zone behind it as well. They had Jokic on the wing. They had Jonas playing in the center position, and they got a few stops. And on the other end, they were rebounding at a pretty high level, and they were securing the boards on the defensive end. So you will see it. And the Houston Rockets, I think, really laid the foundation for this last year. They would run Steven Adams and Alperen Şengün, and in that lineup, they were extremely dominant on offensive rebounding unit, and that was their best two-man pairing in the NBA playoffs and down the stretch of the regular season. So I think for the Nuggets, they look at the OKC Thunder with Chet Holmgren, and then with Isaiah Hartenstein, they see the Minnesota Timberwolves, formerly with Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert. And then if you look throughout the rest of the Western Conference, there are so many teams that play so big, and the Nuggets, one of their best traits is how big and physical they are. So I think in their estimation, how can we double down into an identity that we already possess? Well, we can put Jonas Valanciunas and Jokic together. That way you have two 6'11" and 7-footers that are both 260 plus pounds, and you can really figure out a way to body. And one of the people I got to give credit to, or at least the teams, is the Detroit Pistons a couple of years ago. They ran a two-man pairing with James Wiseman and Jalen Duran. And in that two-man game, they would have Jalen flash towards the middle, and then he would make the decision whether he was going to throw a lob to James Wiseman in order to utilize his athleticism and vertical finishing. And then in that instant, if they didn't have that option, then he would be able to hit that little like kind of short floater slash little 10-footer jump shot right there. So there are teams that have tried this, but now it's, for many people, the best player in the world and the best passer in the world, playmaker in the world, you have in the middle of the floor. How can you find a way to optimize what Jonas Valanciunas is in the post area? So they're going to definitely try some funky lineups with this team. Even though the 2023 team won the title, they only played 8 people consistently in the playoffs, and sometimes it was 7.5, depending on how much they were playing Christian Braun, who's a rookie that season. So now they're in a situation where David Adelman has already said that we want to go 10 or 11 deep. And with that, you're going to have Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, Aaron Gordon, Cameron Johnson, and Christian Braun as your starting 5. But the second man unit so far this season has been Bruce Brown, Tim Hardaway Jr., Peyton Watson, and Jonas Valanciunas, and then a mix of Julian Strawther and Spencer Jones, who you saw yesterday close the second half at center. So they have a lot more versatility than they've had in recent years, and a lot of figuring out what the best lineups will be in the playoffs is about experimenting in preseason and especially the early parts of the regular season when the stakes are a little bit lower, and that way you can really try to figure out who plays the best. Because as you saw yesterday, Cam Johnson and Tim Hardaway Jr., they're still figuring out their flow within the Denver Nuggets system, and especially offensively because the Nuggets offense is so distinctively different because they run an inverted offense. Everything starts in the middle and towards the rim and works itself out. So Cam is having to rewire where he is on the floor. And then he mentioned that Christian Brown has been somebody he's paying attention to because Christian's been operating in that system for 3+ years now. So it just takes a different level of intellect. And it's not that players can't get it. It's just that it takes time to relearn. So I think all of the stuff you're seeing, Cameron Johnson was running the 2 yesterday with that Aaron Gordon, Jonas Valanciunas, Nikola Jokic lineup. Cam Johnson was running the 4 at times because of how he can space the floor next to Valanciunas. Peyton Watson, who traditionally for the Nuggets has not been a ball handler, he's been operating as the primary playmaker with the second unit and also as the secondary ball handler with the starting unit at times. So they're really trying to figure out how do we best optimize our roster to give us the most chance for success, because as you noted in the OKC series, the thing that makes OKC so dangerous is that they have an elite starting 5, but what they have is a lot of versatility on their bench with Cason Wallace and Wiggins, Isaiah Joe, Kendrick Williams. They just have ways, obviously Caruso, they have ways that they can throw hordes of defenders at you, and then on the other end, they got a multiplicity of ball handlers that allows for them to attack you from different angles. In SGA especially is not in the game. So you want to have as much optimal maximization of your roster as possible, and I think Adam is really trying to tap into that in preseason.
Yeah, it shows for sure. You see the depth, and you see, it really is that depth, because I think that was the other thing. I would argue that was the limiting factor in going 7 with OKC. Is like there was just, you need that extra body just to like push that team, push the Thunder to their limit. And it seemed like, it's just like what, 7-man rotation, and that doesn't work anymore. It seems like in these playoffs now, given sort of the physicality and the pace that's being brought to playoff games.
Yeah, the Nuggets, they didn't want to do that last year. Calvin Booth and Michael Malone, one of the reasons they both had to go, they just could not agree on an identity for how the team was going to be built from the inside out. And Booth had a vision of utilizing as many young players as possible, could eventually they develop, and then you don't need to have veterans on the roster. Whereas Michael Malone knew that in order to win, you have to have veterans on your roster, and these young guys aren't good enough to consistently be getting minutes. Jalen Pickett, Julian Strawther, Peyton Watson, Hunter Tyson, and Zeke Naji. That was their bench outside of Russell Westbrook last year. Those are all late-round draft picks and second-round picks. So there was just an identity crisis last season, and you saw it in the playoff that as good as the Denver Nuggets were, they were scrapping. And I'm talking about they were just absolutely scrapping every game just to try to be able to hold on. The starters would have really good runs, and when they got good minutes from the bench, Julian Strawther had an 8-point run in Game 6 in Denver versus the Thunder. That gave them the separation they needed to get a double-digit victory. So now just imagine if you can find a way with a healthy Cameron Johnson, and because Michael Porter was hurt last year, Tim Hardaway Jr. is in that spot, Bruce Brown is in that spot, and now you could also add Jonas Valanciunas to have backup 5 minutes, or Aaron Gordon can play the backup 5 depending on what the situation is. It just gives you a lot more versatility. And this is not to speak of players like Spencer Jones, who, like I said, is going to play. Kessler Edwards, who played with the Dallas Mavericks last year, is kind of on a 2-way contract, Exhibit 10 contract with the Denver Nuggets. That's another player that might get some time with them this year, especially as like a defender. But then they have a 15th roster spot open too. So I think the biggest thing to pay attention to with Denver is they want to make sure that they are not caught off guard and that they are not caught empty-handed, because they don't have any answers outside of the starters being able to play heavy minutes. And that's really what this season is going to be about, how to, again, find the most answers possible. That way, when you get to the NBA playoffs, you can answer every question as best as you can.
Yeah. I want to hit on a point that you brought up, because, when we talk about this revamped Denver Nuggets organization now and the revamped roster, in a lot of ways, it seemed like that revamping started very much with a very bold, stark realignment of the brain trust of the organization, right? And you mentioned it. So Calvin Booth exited, Mike Malone exited 3 days before the playoffs started. and now it seems that they're, outside looking in, it seems to be like that there's a harmony now between the ownership, the front office, and Allen. How, like, what have you picked up on in terms of, like, just like the conversations from, pressers and the things that have been said since, the upheaval started with front office and coaching staff, and now going into, the first few preseasons of this game. What are you taking away from the vibes of, again, like the leadership brain trust going into the season?
That's a good question. Josh Kroenke, once the firings happened, he took a lot of ownership that he was too hands off. He really trusted Booth and Malone to be able to sort through their issues. And these were very well-known disagreements they were having amongst players, amongst like other coaches, and amongst media members. Everyone was aware that there was a disagreement, and perhaps it was underreported just how toxic it got, because we later found out that they would go stretches of time without communicating. And obviously, when you have a head coach and you have a general manager, you have to be on the same page. I mean, you should be speaking every day, if not every other day, because you just have to be on the same, like, hey, how are your players feeling? How's this feeling? How are you? Like, what do you need? Do you feel like we're where we are? Do we need more shooting? Do we need more rebounding? Do we need more defense? That at some point just stopped happening, because Booth had an idea in his head, and that was going to be executed for better or for worse. And Malone just felt like he just was put between, really honestly, a rock and a hard place. And I just can't make the moves that we need to make as a roster. So when they got relieved of their duties, it was obviously for a lot of Nuggets fans, especially for Michael Malone, he was there for 10 years. He was the first coach to win a title with Denver. He was the winningest coach in franchise history over Doug Moe. There's so much about Malone that is beloved. So it was very difficult for the fan base to lose him. And for the players, Jokic was drafted in 14, but he got there in 15. Jamal Murray got there in 16. Michael Porter at the time had got there in 18. Gordon had got there in 21. Everybody grew up with Malone. Like, that was their coach. They only knew Malone. And as Malone got older, as the coaches and everything changed around with the players, they went from being, 19, 20 years old to now 28, 30 years old. These were men now. So I do think there was a little bit of a personality change that needed to happen. And David Adelman is he's a lot more X's and O's in some ways. He's extremely analytical in how he thinks, and he's just a little younger. So there's just a naturally different vibe that he has. And I think a renewed energy comes from the Nuggets not having any more distractions at the ownership level, not having more distractions at the leadership level when it comes to the front office, and then now no longer having the beef with the head coach and the GM. Now they're just free to play basketball. And you add in, they have so many new players on the roster that are clear, proven veterans in this league that have had success in this league. So when you watch the team play, and you notably watch the game versus the Chicago Bulls, they were getting up 16, 17, 18, 21, 22 points with the starters on the floor, in part because they just feel much freer, and everybody seems to have a renewed sense of purpose, and everybody seems to be buying into an identity and buying into the belief that if we're healthy and we're together and we play our basketball, there is not a team on earth that can beat us when it matters the most. And I think that is the energy that's been communicated so far through their play, and even a little bit through the press conference. They would never come out right and say that, but Christian Brown even noted, we have what we need. We know that we have what we need. And so now it's about going out and executing and doing your job to the best of your ability. That's really been the organizational shift that's happened since all the firings happened 3 games before the regular season ended last year.
Yeah, it's a sight to behold at this moment now, for me personally at least. But yeah, just the whole ebbs and flow of those kind of, again, bold organizational changes that, that I imagine weren't perceived without risk, because again, you do this right when the team's supposed to be getting locked in for playoff run, and like, what kind of distractions does that create? But it seemed like it was just the necessary medicine that perhaps was counterintuitive, but it has changed a lot. And the thing that I also like, one player in particular with the new players that have been added that I find interesting in this story arc of the Nuggets revamping themselves, is being able to successfully bring Bruce Brown back to this organization. What is that? What is that impact for this latest addition of this roster to have that player back from that championship team? How is he impacting the players and just the locker room at this point?
There was a world where, for years, the Nuggets never felt like they could keep talent because they wanted to leave, and they never felt like people wanted to sign with Denver because it was Denver. You know, there's no aura about the franchise. There's no legacy about the franchise. Bruce Brown is one of the clear signs that this new era of Nuggets basketball is drastically different than what it was in previous decades. Because Bruce said himself he was thinking about coming back to Denver ever since he left. When he got to the Pacers on a 2-year, $45 million deal, he was wanting to come back to Denver. And then he went to Toronto, and then he went with the Pelicans, had 2 really down years. So Bruce has expressed an interest that as soon as free agency opened up, he then let the Denver Nuggets know that he wanted to come back into the building, and he would be willing to do so on a veteran minimum. And I think that says a lot about what the players have done in setting a very good atmosphere, because I think for them, they have now become such a force that other players want to be a part of the culture that they are building. That speaks to Jokic and Murray and Gordon in particular. Like I said, Jokic's been there since 15, Murray's been there since 16. I mean, they have literally together have been able to build a place where players feel like they're involved, like they're celebrated, and like, hey, you can come play your best version of basketball here, and nobody cares about the spotlight. We want you to be as good as you possibly can be. And Cam Johnson is having to learn that now. Jokic has had to say that, like, don't worry about fitting in. Be yourself. And then we will work together and figure out the best way to move forward playing basketball. So I think Bruce is a testament to the culture they built. And also I think he's added a lot in the locker room because people like him. You know, he really feels like he's a part of the Colorado, I would say, culture, because, you know, he loves wearing cowboy boots, cowboy hats. He loves going out and golfing. He loves being outdoors. He likes riding horses. I mean, this speaks to like the historical Colorado stuff that I don't even necessarily, you know, take part in. So he obviously is just a really good fit. I think that as the season goes on, he's going to add a lot, especially defensively, because one of the things he's really good at is screen navigation. And you saw yesterday that Peyton Watson and Cam Johnson are good defenders, but, you know, they're so big and long that things sometimes can get caught up. But whereas Bruce is really good about getting skinny and getting around the screen, and then that way he can really try to disrupt what the pick and roll is doing. And then hopefully what that does, especially with a player like Vooch, you know, when Vooch is such a good jump shooter as a center, you need to be able to get around that screen. That way the center can go back and recover and then be good enough and be stout enough to stay in front of a man. And Josh Giddey scored over him yesterday, but that's because Josh is obviously a lot bigger than him, but he just has a lot of positional value. You know, when you watch him the other day, when he played versus the Clippers versus like Kawhi Leonard and versus John Collins, he gets in your shirt. And that is something the Nuggets desperately need from a defender. And so he kind of just covers a lot of different areas for this team. So I think as the season goes along, he's going to get better and better and better, really the same way he did in 2023.
You see it. And I would suspect, again, this is just outside looking in, his return, there seems to be a new energy that's bringing to the roster. And again, I'm just hypothesizing, but, you know, just seeing how dominant Jamal Murray was last night. To drop 30 in a preseason game, everybody, yeah, like I know everybody says preseason games don't matter, and yeah, you probably shouldn't read too much into it. But at the same time, when the ball got tipped off, like I was just in awe of what I was seeing from Jamal Murray, because like his attack was relentless for that whole time he was on the floor. And so I have to imagine just like having that familiar face with Bruce Brown, that has to be impacting Jamal Murray as well, where it feels like, okay, I'm back. It's go time.
Yeah, Jamal is an interesting character because he is very well liked in the Denver space. But, you know, Jamal, his biggest thing has always been inconsistency, because, you know, Jamal has this reputation, and it may not be true, but it's just a reputation, and a lot of reputation is narrative, that he doesn't come into camp in shape. And Jamal basically said that, look, I just got a chance to rest this summer because I wasn't hurt. Because remember, in 2022, when he came back from the injury, he was still like rehabbing and went into the year and was a little slow. 23, 24, they had played all the way through the finals. And so he was just fatigued going into the year the next year. And then the next year, going into 24, 25, remember, he had an injury that he had suffered in the Lakers series, and he had an injury in the regular season, came back for 5 games, suffered a calf injury versus the Lakers, shot horribly, and then played through the Minnesota series, shot 38% from the field. And then he went to the Olympics with Canada, shot 19% from 3 and 34% from the field. So he literally went into the regular season the next year limping, and he was playing. I remember I was putting charts out like, D'Lo was playing bad for the Lakers. D'Lo and Jamal were playing the same level to start the year off. But once Jamal got comfortable and he got healthy, what happens is, if you look at his numbers, he'll go on a 45, 50 game run where he's averaging 23 points, 6.5 to 7 assists, 4.5 to 5 rebounds, and he's shooting 50, 40, 90. And I'm not stressing those numbers either. He would shoot 49, 40 plus, 90 from the free throw line. And he does this all the time. The difference is now, because he's rested, he feels like he can come into the year no hesitation, holding nothing back. And you saw yesterday, whether it be the sidestep, the pick and roll navigation to the step back, to be able to read the floor. Obviously he got Vooch switched out on him. Josh Giddey staring at Jamal. He gets a backdoor cut to Aaron Gordon for a dunk. He's maneuvering transition. You saw where he did over, I can't remember who it was, but he got to the rim and did a Michael Jordan switch to the left hand in the air. Like, he's just in a different bag right now. And in the Clippers, you saw it. In the Raptors game, you saw it. And I think a lot of this with Jamal is, if he starts fast, that changes what the Nuggets are. Because what happens typically is Jokic comes out, he kind of evaluates, okay, how's the rest of the team? Where's everybody else at? And then if Jokic sees like, oh, they don't have it yet to start the year, that's when he'll start like 30, 14, 12 immediately. But if Jokic had his ideal world and everybody else was just like feeling good like they are right now, I mean, Jokic would be 21, 10, and 10. And because he literally will play based on the situation that's around him. So if Jamal comes out healthy, everybody in Denver, I'm telling you, wants him to be an all-star, wants him to be an all-NBA player. So the goal is, if he makes it through, Lord willing, makes it healthy, I hope that this is Jamal's career season, and that what you see right now is just a precursor for a dominant regular season from really one of the most talented guards that exists in the league. He's just never been able to hold a high-level sustained season together.
Yeah. Yeah, what I saw last night from Jamal Murray, it's if I were to draw an analogy from it, I guess like the Midwesterner in me is like, it was when the big thunderstorm is about to happen, you know it's about to happen. You smell it, you see it. Like, that's I think the storm of Jamal Murray's career season, he's showing the signals so far, and I'm going to be keenly paying attention to like how he functions, because him being healthy, to me, that's always been the like, my opinion, the staple of that. You mentioned earlier the inverted game that Denver likes to run. Like, that's so critical to like putting Joker in a position where like he gets to be the playmaker he is. With Murray coming off those DHOs at the top of the key, like it's a nearly unguardable attack when it's clicking.
Yeah, I like that analogy and metaphor. The idea that as somebody who grew up in Colorado, you can, you'll be outside and it will start getting a little gray, but then you get that first whiff of heavy rainfall is on the way. Or when it snows, you're in the Midwest or the West, you can feel it in the air, because all of a sudden it will start getting like almost like a very dry, piercing cold. Yeah. And that's before the snow ever hits. So maybe this is what it is. Maybe the 30 points he had last night versus the Bulls and Isaac Okoro and Ayo Dosunmu, maybe it's just that simple. Maybe he is about to have a career year. And people ask me all the time, like, who do I think the best two-man game in the NBA is? Well, the reason it's Jamal and Jokic, because no one can play together like Jamal and Jokic. You might have more talent, Anthony Davis and LeBron at the time, or LeBron James and Luka Doncic, or Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, or Kyrie Irving and then Anthony Davis now. Or you might have J-Dub, Chet, SGA, whichever one you want to pick out of that, or James Harden and Kawhi Leonard, or Kawhi Leonard and Zubac, or James Harden and Zubac. Like, so there's like options. The problem is no one is able to put together a two-man game of high-level three-point shooting, high-level mid-range shooting, and high-level rim finishing, and high-level playmaking like Murray and Jokic can. So again, this is a synergy that literally has been developed since 2016. So every time you see a rep of them, and this is why kids, when you're watching them play, or you're playing in college, or you're playing in high school, repetition is key, because they have literally run thousands of unseen pick and rolls in practice, and then they've run thousands of pick and rolls in the regular season, and they've run hundreds of pick and rolls in the NBA playoffs. So every time you see them work that two-man game, this is a 10-year relationship that's been in place. So I think for a lot of folks, this is why this could be a special season, because now you got Cam Johnson, Aaron Gordon, Christian Brown, and then you have all these other players that are kind of a part of this mix. And historically, this isn't like a historically great team. This isn't a team with historically great talent. But for this league and this NBA, should they be healthy, they should have enough to reach the heights they want to reach. Now, that's granted, if you ask me, I think the 4 best teams in the NBA are all in the Western Conference. I think the Thunder, I think the Nuggets, I think the Clippers, and I think you can make an argument for the Wolves. Now, obviously, the Houston Rockets, they don't have Fred VanVleet anymore. I think that changes things for them. But if you ask me in a series, I think that the New York Knicks and Cleveland are really good, but the West is so stacked at the top. So it's going to take a lot of good fortune on your side to be able to get the job done.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's a stark difference between the NBA's Western Conference and the Eastern Conference, probably more than I feel like ever this particular season, because the balance of power is just so skewed to the West. And really talent's a parameter. Just the size of the West compared to the East right now, there's no comparison to me. I feel like Evan Mobley's the single big player in the East this season. There's some others for sure, but it's just, you can't compare. Everybody calls the East the JV conference for a reason, and it's legit. When you stack the teams, I do think Orlando has actually upgraded quite a bit to where I won't be surprised if they're in the Eastern Conference Finals this season, just given the defensive pedigree they already have right now. And it's a question of, is Desmond Bane enough offensive juice to really give them the right roster balance to where, they can go deep in 7-game series and get the job done.
Yeah, I think the season for them, obviously Paolo, Franz, they got to be healthy. Wendell Carter, Mo Wagner, Bane, Suggs, they have to be healthy. But for me, a lot of the Magic season rests on Anthony Black and Jace Richardson. How much can they develop as offensive creators on the ball to be able to get Paolo and Franz and all these other players engaged and involved? Paolo, one of the things that's, and you go back to 2 years ago when he had the great series, the Game 7 series versus the Cleveland Cavaliers, he was shooting really well from kind of the mid-range area, but wasn't finishing around the rim well. But, can Paolo find a way to become a true 3-level scorer? Because last year when he was healthy, first part, he was a 30 points per game player. And then basically for the month on, when he got back, he was a 28, 30 points per game player on pretty good efficiency. So he's going to have to continue to develop. Franz Wagner has to continue to develop, but they have to have one of their guards, I think, really be able to take a leap, because their defense is about to be insane for the second straight season. But now can they have enough scoring prowess to be able to kind of combat what the other teams are going to do? And then on the other side of this too, maybe they're like a younger, worse version of OKC was just a couple of years ago. Because you know what? If you told me that this year too, they're the number 1 seed, number 2 seed, number 3 seed, I wouldn't be shocked by any of that. Because again, when you have such a high floor because of your defense, you really just need 2 or 3 players to put you over the top offensively.
Yeah, and it seems to be, at least from the outside looking in, that seems to be the recipe that the Magic are going after this season, where they feel confident in their defense. They go out and get, do the big move to get Bang. And the flip side of it shouldn't be underappreciated. Sending out KCP, who very well, KCP is a very elite high level defender. And I'll plug for our member exclusive, as a member exclusive, I did a vlog just kind of chronicling defensive highlights from that Magic season last year, because we had Ryan Kaminsky, who's on the Magic beat. He talked about it at length, what makes their defense so impactful is the fact that the Magic are probably one of the few teams who aren't all that switch happy. They set a standard for themselves where they want to fight through every single screen, and they're getting up in your chest, and they're getting on your, they're getting in your face at the point of attack, even before you cross that half court line. And it's just, there's a ball pressure there that like they seem to like excel it and make that truly their DNA.
Yeah, they're going to be a lot for people to handle. And I think for a lot of people, you know, when you're young and you haven't done anything, there's a lot of like expectations going into years where people feel like it's gas or it's hype. But there's a reality, like I said, especially with the Pacers not being there. You know, the Eastern Conference is a conference of surprises. You don't really have a lot of surprises in the West. Like the Thunder, they're supposed to be there. The Mavericks were a surprise, but again, they made like the Daniel Gafford trade and the PJ Washington trade, it changed their team. So they were a very elite team after the trade. And then you look at the year before, the Denver Nuggets, obviously, they were number one all season. And then they made the championship, won the championship. So then if you kind of look at and evaluate like the Golden State Warriors in 22, obviously when Steph was healthy, they were great in the regular season. Then in playoffs, I think a very favorable outcome, but also Steph played really well in the finals. They won. In the Eastern Conference, it's like, you know, the Heat can sneak up on you and they can make it. The Pacers can sneak up on you and they can make it. The Magic could easily be the sneak up on you team in the Eastern Conference that out of nowhere, it's just like, yo, we just literally cannot score on them. And all of a sudden, Paolo and Franz are like the best wing duo we've seen since Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. So again, I wanna really like take my time to watch the Magic this year because they have a lot of really good players that I'm really excited for this year.
Absolutely. And I would add to that from the Eastern Conference side as well as far as the sneak up team. The Atlanta Hawks have to be in that conversation as well. And I think it will be an interesting referendum on Trae Young is like the primary focal point of a roster this year, because in a lot of ways it seems like as much banter and sort of like criticism that's been thrown at him, I think this is a viable path, at least in terms of the talent that they've surrounded him with this particular season, where you have much more size and length around him finally. Even from what I've seen from some of the Hawks preseason games, it's just a more balanced organization and more balanced roster where, like, you know, you don't have Trae just defaulting to heat check 3-point shots anymore, but he, you know, with Porzingis on the floor, there's a more willingness to find the second and third action to get better quality shots. And I think it is making a difference. And then it's just, you have reliable defenders around Trae now.
Trae Young is one of the most interesting players that have heard about in a long time. And one of the reasons is Trae has so much like to him as a playmaker, as a passer, and, you know, not a great scorer in terms of like the numbers, because, you know, he was shooting below 40% for a lot of last season. I think there's a lot of situation around him. I like Trae Young. You know, I put out on Twitter the other day about, like, you know, Trae and maybe the Hawks end up trading him for pieces, and Hawks fans were just like, but they built this team around him. Why would they do that? I don't think they should. I think that the Hawks not giving him a contract extension is very indicative of how they feel about Trae. They're wondering the same thing that a lot of people are wondering. Can you build a contender around him? But this year, everybody knows knows I love Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I could not for the life of me understand why you got him for a second-round pick. He was making $4.5 million a year when he was playing for the Minnesota Timberwolves, which I thought was just crazy given the amount of money that guards and that 6'6" combo guards make in this league. He's going to be really good with them. Dyson Daniels, obviously an incredible defender. He's still super young. Zachary Richache, I think, looked great in Eurobasket this year. I'm expecting a big season from him. And Jalen Johnson. A lot of people don't realize Jalen Johnson last year, I believe he was fourth in passes per game in the NBA last year. I believe it was 61 passes a game Jalen Johnson was making. He is a much better playmaker and initiator than he gets credit for, and he's huge. He's athletic. He adds a jump shot. He stays healthy this year. This could be a 20, 10, and 5 player, and people are like, well, he averaged 19, 10, and 5 last year. Again, all you need is a floor. If he gives you 20, 10, and 5 this year, he plays high-level defense, that's an all-star in the Eastern Conference. And then you add in Kristaps Porzingis. If he goes back to 2 years ago, or even you go back to 3 years ago with the Wizards, he was one of the best post finishers, post scorers, and ISO scorers in the league. If he's healthy this year, you get 65 games of Kristaps Porzingis and Jalen Johnson and Zachary Richache and Dyson Daniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Onyeka Okongwu. And, like, I like Vic Krejci. Like, he's good. He's a good player. Asa Newell's a good player. And then you got Muhammad Gueye. They have a really talented roster that I think Trae Young can really optimize, but they have to stay healthy. Again, I'd be surprised if they made the NBA Finals. But that should be a team that is literally giving everybody the business night in and night out. So I'm actually really excited to watch them play too.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, Porzingis is such a spacing cheat code, also, when you think about it, because I found him. This is my opinion. I found that Porzingis was absolutely invaluable, like secret sauce for the Celtics to finally win that championship. Because one of the things I remarked on when the Celtics went to the 22 finals against the Golden State Warriors, they just couldn't score inside the arc. And Porzingis changed that so drastically for them in the positive direction. Where, I mean, Porzingis pulls up from the elbow, he was near automatic in that 24 finals, and so like just being able to give Trey that outlet now where he probably hasn't had that before. It takes, I think, a lot of pressure off of him to again like not be this guy that defaults to half court shots or like these very deep 3-point shots is like the early offense, but like be much more selective about that. And he has the ability to be an elite playmaker now, where it's like, the ball's going to move to where it needs to move.
Yeah, he's always been one of the 4 best playmakers in the league, or at least in the last several seasons. I think, he's always going to shoot deep threes because that's like a part of his game. But to your point, hey, like if he has more space around him now, and then he's taking those threes, I mean, you're bringing the defense further out. And I got Jalen Johnson and Chris Dodd to take advantage of that, and Zachary Richichet. So they should be, I mean, again, like they're healthy. That's a 50-plus win team.
Yeah,
and I think as somebody who lives in Atlanta, I think that this city is like dying to watch the Hawks have a repeat of the 2021 year where they can make it back to the conference finals. So the Magic, the Hawks, the Cleveland, the Knicks, I mean, that's probably my strong top 4 that's going to be in the Eastern Conference, and that's a really good top 4 as well.
Yeah. Another hierarchy, actually, I want to get your take on this because, I mean, yeah, we just talked about the top of the East and we talked about the top of the West already. Equally as intriguing to me, honestly, is that very next tier, the Western Conference, because I think because of how deep that conference is, the depth of talent, and just so many of the machinations that happened in the offseason, there's a lot of interesting possibilities. I mean, off the top of my head, I'll just say from my perspective, I believe that the San Antonio Spurs have the talent to actually finally, like, not just be a play. I mean, I think playing team is absolutely their floor. I think, the Spurs have it where if health is coming together, they have enough talent and upside, frankly, to be solidly in like that top 6 of the Western Conference. I think, the Warriors adding Al Horford also, I don't think that should go underappreciated. I mean, their old team and health is a big factor, but it's a team where if it's healthy, I don't think you can discount them at all. I'm not going to discount Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler. And then now Horford, who's like probably the best thing possible they could have added to that roster. Those are 2 teams just off the top of my head. But what do you think about like that second tier, the West? Who are you sort of slotting into that space?
So in that atmosphere, I have the Rockets, I have the Lakers, and I have the Golden State Warriors in that, would that be 5 through 7 spot? And then I would have the Dallas Mavericks slotted right after that, and then I would have the San Antonio Spurs and the Portland Trailblazers, I believe, is kind of how I built that out. So, yeah, I mean, the Lakers are the Lakers. Luka, LeBron, Reeves, Ayton, they're still going to has the potential to be really good. I think the Warriors, they're just older, but Jimmy Butler, Steph Curry, Draymond Green, and Al Horford, I mean, that's going to be a nightmare for, especially defensively with, Podziemski or, Kuminga or Moses Moody, whoever they put in that spot. They could also be better than I'm giving it credit for because some ESPN models have them as high as like the number 2 seed. I don't think they'll be quite that good, but I do think they have a path to making the conference finals if, that's granted on health for them. I think the Lakers have a chance as well. But I think the issue is what happened with the Houston Rockets now with Reed Shepherd, and then Amin Thompson, Jabari, Kevin Durant, Alperen Şengün. They did get Dorian Finney-Smith, but then they only have like Aaron Holiday as the other backup guard. So I just want to see what their offense looks like because they're going to be a very dominant defense and offensive rebounding team again. But is Kevin Durant, is that over-the-top isolation wing shot making, is that going to be enough to kind of really put them in a driver's seat in the West, which is possible, definitely could. So there's just a lot of more questions I have about that tier than I do in the first tier. But to be fair, like in the playoffs, I probably would have the Thunder and the Nuggets in tier 1, and then I would kind of have another tier after that. But all those teams in the regular season are all going to be really good. Really, just it's just going to come down to matchups. I mean, at the end of the day, like who you play and can you take advantage of their weaknesses better than they can take advantage of yours.
Absolutely. And more than ever, we talk about the parity league, but it really is, to me, the parity is more about a statement of, like the matchups that show up in these playoff series. And it's becoming more and more like clear that you just have to have the depth, because it's almost like unrealistic to assume that you're going to have full health at any point in the playoffs now, given the way the game's played.
Yeah, so that was the thing that aided the Thunder. The Thunder fan, they will bring up Jalen Williams having the injury to his hand, but obviously it didn't affect him that much. He had 40 in the NBA Finals game, and he was just obviously just great for a lot of the finals, great for some of the Western Conference Finals, really good in the first round versus the Memphis Grizzlies. So again, if you're healthy and then you feel like you got all your guys, and then on top of that, you have bought into a scheme over an 82 game sample size, you bought into an identity, an 82 game sample size. Like, I'm much higher on the Clippers than a lot of people, man. Just people think the Clippers are going to clip, which is kind of just the way they describe what they think the Clippers are going to do in terms of failing. But the Clippers have ever only lost to one team when they're fully healthy since Kawhi got there, ever. Yeah. And it's only been Denver. They've never gotten another opportunity to go further than the second round because they keep running into Denver. But if the Clippers are fully healthy, they run into anybody else. I think that's going to be another very difficult series to try to beat them. Now, SGA right now is like, he's living in a different planet than maybe any other guard in the NBA currently. And really, like, for a lot of people, he could be the best player in the world. And if you watch his over-the-top shot making and just driving and his pace and his control, yeah, SGA is like going to be really hard to topple because he's that good at this point. And then on top of that, J-Dub's going to be in year 4. And he already made all NBA last year. Chet Holmgren is going to be healthy again this year as well. So they're going to be tough. And then Caruso, I think, is spectacular. They have a lot of really good players, man. So it's going to be really, really tough to beat the Thunder. But I do think that the Clippers are one of those teams that if you told me they were in the finals this year, again, I just wouldn't be shocked about it.
I don't disagree with you. In that first round, I mean, the Clippers, they looked like a formidable opponent for the Denver Nuggets in the playoffs this past season. And the defense is legit. It is a solid defense. And I had Dime Dropper on, who he covered, sort of a lock. Yeah, he's locked on Clippers, right? So he covered, like he gave the lowdown on, not enough people are talking about the impact that Jeff Van Gundy has delivered to that organization and that organization's defense. Like they're going to be solid defensively, and I don't think anybody should be thrilled if they're drawing the Clippers in a playoff series.
No, they shouldn't. And when they had Kawhi healthy, I think for the last 30 or so games, I think they had the number 2 net rating in the NBA behind the Thunder, and that includes having, I think, the number 2 defense and maybe the number 1 offense with Kawhi. So yeah, they're a lot better than people are giving them credit for. But I'm still excited, to watch. Again, the NBA is going to be special this year. Again, I'm hoping, I'm praying. Didn't happen last year, and just the nature of football or basketball, like any sport, football, basketball, any team sport that you're playing, soccer, if you're a soccer fan, injuries affect everything in team sport. And, there have been some super stacked rosters. You remember that Philadelphia Eagles team from like 2007 when they had a super team. Look, you got injuries here and there. You're not winning anything, and I think it's the very same with the Denver Nuggets this year, with the Thunder this year, with the Clippers this year, with the Cleveland this year, with the Knicks this year. Mitchell Robinson, if he doesn't stay healthy, then everything falls apart for the Knicks too. So you just gotta hope that your medical science department and your doctors and your nutritionists are doing everything they can, and they're just having a wonderful year where everything works perfectly, and then you ain't got to worry about nobody's foot, nobody's ankle, nobody's knee, nobody's hip, nobody's chest, and then like randomly getting sick for 4 months like Kristoff did last year. So everything comes up to you got to be ready when the moment calls for you, because that's just really what the NBA is.
Yeah, 100%. So I want to round it out with just one more Nuggets thing, because this is also, I think, an interesting storyline for this team this upcoming season. So what are you projecting or what are you expecting in terms of impact, specifically Christian Braun and then Peyton Watson this year? Because I mean, this is a critical season for them as well. Like they're both extension eligible. We just had a whole off season of kind of like this restricted free agency soap opera, and I'm curious where those two players stand, and like if you had to, put a DraftKings parlay out today, not to gamble or say that you need to gamble about this, like where are they standing with the Nuggets front office right now in terms of like, are they likely to get extension, or this is something where they may end up having to go to a RFA next summer?
Well, I think Christian for sure is getting one. The question is going to be the money. At one point I was like, I'd be great if it was a $22 million a year. But then Ryan Blackburn from Mile High Sports, he basically put an argument together that based on a percentage of the cap, 27, 25, 30, that's just not going to be a lot 2 years from now with the TV rights deal that's going to be coming in at that point. So I think for Christian, he's going to get probably between 20 to 29 mil, if not 30. And I think you should be really happy with that if you get a 4-year deal with Christian around that range. Because, look, I'm not going to lie to you, man. Like, I did not expect Christian to last year and 2 years ago when he, was just second-year player behind KCP. He was a 7 points per game player, good shooter. But, like, you could tell, like, it was more like mostly open standalone threes. Christian then doubled his points output, became a much better passer, became a very good guard rebounder, and became a very good defender as the year went on. And then he averaged 15 plus on 58% from the field, dominant from two, and shot 39% from three and then 82% from the line. And then he had some really good games in the playoffs. So then the question is, like, Christian now, like as of this preseason, he's operating as he did yesterday to pick and roll more as a primary ball handler. He's been making phenomenal passes the last few games with Jokic in particular. And he's just much more aware as a player now. So the question becomes, if his growth is something that we're still expecting next year, like this year, he's even better than last year. Okay, but what does a better season than that look like? So is he a 16 and a half points per game player? Is he 7 rebounds again, 3.5 assists, 4 assists? But now is he even more efficient? Is he an even better defender? Like, is he more critically, like in critical possessions, is even better about like finishing those possessions as a mid-range shooter? Last year he shot terribly from the mid-range. Like, yeah, if he makes those improvements, then all of a sudden $30 million is an underpay, because that's just where he is in his career. This is going to be year 4 for him. So Peyton Watson, on the other hand, is probably not going to get a deal, I think, because right now I don't think he would get more than about $11-15 million. And for Peyton, as I talk to Peyton, obviously, and as I talk to his people especially, I think they believe he could be a star in this league. And I don't blame him. He was a 5-star recruit out of California. He didn't play a lot at UCLA, but then was still a first-round pick off just sheer talent alone. He's 6'7", 7-foot plus wingspan, one of the best wing protectors in terms of rim in the NBA. He is very, very good on ball. And on top of that, like, he's adding ball handling and playmaking to his ledger. He's been the primary playmaker when Jokic goes out of the game. Like, when there's no Jamal Murray, it's really been Peyton that's been navigating the defense. And then on the other end, he's picking up full court and also working as a help side defender. So if he has a career year this year and he's shooting and not just like, when one of the things is when you become a shooter in the league, spot up shooting is one thing. You're still not going to be treated as a shooter, as a spot up shooter, unless you're like Michael Porter, Cam Johnson, Norman Powell, those kind of players. But what you can do to elevate your status among defenders is if you can be able to navigate those pick and rolls, and when they play drop coverage or go under a screen because they don't believe in your shot ability, and you can hit those shots at a pretty like reputable level, that's how you start extending the defense out. And I think Peyton, if he's able to step into that, then all of a sudden now you're talking about Peyton in the 20-something millions. And I think the Nuggets want to have that problem. They would love to have the problem, but like, man, like, what do we do? Like, are we going to pay all these guys? And so I think Peyton, he should probably wait, because if he has a career year this year, he's probably going to double the money that he could have got this summer. So either way, I want them to get as much money as possible, obviously, because the NBA is a very short-lived career, and you got to make as much money as you can while you're there. But both of them are probably going to get deals. But I think Christian gets one now. Peyton might end up waiting a little longer.
Yeah, certainly the optics I see where you're coming from with that because I mean Christian Brown already just the impact he's making, just getting starter reps, right? There probably is the case there for like getting attractive extension hammered out at this point versus maybe like all the performance that you're hoping for with Peyton Watson isn't there yet, but there's a growth trajectory at least, and you can see that. So it'll be interesting, and certainly people when they talk about the RFA market coming up this season, I mean, maybe it's not as bad as this past summer because there will be some cap space out there. But I'm kind of skeptical of that, to be honest, because you've just seen that this year after year, the trend in free agency, whether it's restricted or unrestricted, there just isn't big movement anymore in the free agency periods where, like, if it's true talent, the talent's finding a way to get the extension done with the current team, whether they want to be there or not, to be honest.
Yeah, if I'm drafting, well, and those players are good, and I have their bird rights, like I'm not letting them go. It's really that simple. So yeah, it's really hard to find some of those players, and I think what you have to do is you actually have to find players that are kind of on the margin. And like I said, that's Jared Vanderbilt on the margin, 2 second-round picks. That's Nickeil Alexander on the margin, second-round pick. All those players are now making double-digit $1 million per year now. I think those are the players you really have to try to find a target. I like Keon Johnson, Zaire Williams. I think those are 2 other players that are going to be hitting the market at some point in time that I would look at. Both of them play for the Nets. Ayo Dosunmu, I think he's making $7 million a year right now.
Yeah, he has real team-friendly restricted free agency
please,
contract.
I would love to pay him $15 million a year. So I'm telling you, Ayo, come my way. You're going to be a rich man.
Let me. I was hoping I wasn't gonna have to be pessimist Bulls fan again, but your boy Arturas Karnisovas, he's got to set better trade prices if he wants to make trades happen, and I think that's just as a Bulls executive at least. I can't speak to what he was like when he was out there in Denver with you guys, but his challenge is he's not. I don't think he's setting realistic trade prices for himself to where Ayo for teams that I'm sure really want him. Perhaps we even want to do business with the Bulls. There was a lot reported about how this past trade deadline, the 25 trade deadline in February went, where teams apparently found AK difficult to work with. And then like Nikola Vucevic in particular. A lot of people argue he shouldn't be on this roster right now and that like he should have like been in Warriors jersey already. And even the fact that like the reports of like, oh, the Warriors are off, but they're back and like this seesaw dynamic, it seems like there's a question about like what kind of price tag does Arturas Karnisovas put internally in his own building versus what his peers value all these Bulls players at? Because I mean, this is just like this is economics 101. I'll go back to business school with this. Like it's supply and demand. Like there has to be a meeting of the middle of like what the price of the supply is versus what the demand. If the other 29 NBA players aren't going to demand Ayo Dosunmu for like 3 first-round picks. I'm just saying that hypothetically, but you keep thinking Arturas, they're like, oh, if I'm going to trade Ayo, who I love so much, I have to get 3 first-round picks. Otherwise, I don't win the trade. Well, I don't know. Like negotiations require meetings of the minds, and that's been the Achilles heel of this Bulls front office. It seems like they have not been able to meet minds on deals.
Yeah, I'm telling you right now. I remember when the Caruso Josh Giddey trade happened, at the time, remember it was like a swap. Now, Josh Giddey could very well end up being an all-star this year, and, I think Bulls fans feel a lot better about that. But I was just like, Alex Caruso, do you know what I would have paid for Alex Caruso? Because even at the time, like, he was already, like, on track for, like, one of the best guard defenders in the history of the sport. And he was shooting 40% from 3 that year, too. And I was just like, I can't understand why, you would just settle for Josh Giddey, especially at the time, because Josh Giddey's reputation was kind of in the mud, because he just wasn't, a playoff player, with the Thunder. But he's turned out, he's gotten a lot better. But Arturas has to figure out, like, I think a better vision for how to build this team. I don't know what's going to happen with Kobe White. I think Kobe obviously should stay. I think he should be a part of like the future for this team. I truly don't know what they're going to do about Ayo though. I just can't see a world where you're starting Ayo and Josh and Kobe. So obviously it's going to be Matas and it's going to be Josh Giddey and Kobe. And so at that point, it's just kind of like, does Ayo just want to keep being a bench player? And he'll be a bench player in a lot of places too, but I just think he could his reputation, if he played in a different organization that was contending in the playoffs every year, I think he would have a far different reputation around the league.
Yeah. Well, I get the sense that NBA people they know very well who Ayo Dosunmu is. The media coverage probably isn't keeping up with that, but I get a sense that most organizations know about Ayo and they would love to have him. It's just it's who they have to work with in order to get that acquisition of Ayo. I think that's the thing that I think people should pay attention to, because there really is no reason why he shouldn't be able to be moved for like some reasonable compensation. But and then it's like, especially with Arturas's own draft picks, like it seems like there's a sentimental factor with that as well, because I will tell you, going back to that very first season where he took over the front office and the Bulls were on top of the East, there was a lot of like fervor about like, okay, like maybe we need to go all in. Hey, Patrick Williams, what can he fetch us? And there just didn't seem like there was going to be any sort of talk of like, oh, we have to keep Patrick Williams. Like, he's off limits. And that just seemed like an absurd move. It seemed like an absurd position to have when you already did all those moves to go get DeMar, to go get Caruso, go get Vucevic. So, yeah. But the good thing is you covered the Denver Nuggets, and I think you'll be for sure talking about like high leverage basketball this year. The Bulls, they'll be there. They'll be there doing basketball things, I suppose. not quite Nuggets things. But with that, I really appreciate having you on the show today. Swiper, where can people find you? Definitely plug all your stuff.
You can just Google Swipa, come up on Twitter, will come up on YouTube, obviously Locked On Nuggets. If you like NFL, Locked On NFL, I do a show every Sunday. Press Box, if you like NFL, I do that every Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. and then every Sunday at 11 a.m. And then if you like NBA basketball, you can catch me on Player's Choice on the panel. That's from 11 to 2 every day. On Player's Choice, and we do that on YouTube. So shout out to y'all, man. I really appreciate it. Great show, man. And make sure you are plugging your own stuff. Make sure y'all like, share, and subscribe too for this, man. This is a great show, great questions, great flow, and I really see the vision for going forward as well.
Absolutely. No, thank you. Appreciate that. That means a lot. And certainly, yes, please like, comment, subscribe on this video. Please subscribe to the Narratives Per Possession YouTube channel, where we have actually grown just this past week. I added a second podcast show. In case you haven't watched it yet, please go and watch this as well, Swiper. There's a second show in addition to this one. So Narratives Per Possession podcast is the main show we're doing right now. But the second show I added that I'm very excited about is called Coach Conversations. And so in the first episode, we had associate head coach from the Rice men's basketball program, Chris Kreider, on, and we talked about we did game film from New Orleans, from a few of the New Orleans Pelicans preseason games, and it's just a great conversation because Coach Kreider, he really broke down like some of the interesting things that are in the Pelicans offense so far, and the reason why he did that, he actually had Trey Murphy at Rice, recruited him, and it's just a really cool vibe. And I'm trying to bring, again, like I said at the top of the show, better basketball narratives to the world. I think we all can appreciate that and want more of that, where we make the game the main thing again. So that's what we're trying to do here. And then also in the banner, like I have here, we also have a Patreon community as well, where a lot of great video content and written contents out there. And we are also accepting guest blog posts from anybody that has aspirations, or maybe you do write basketball. If you want to tell better basketball stories, hit us up on Patreon. Join the Patreon community, and you can be a guest blogger there as well. So those are things I have out there. I really appreciate everybody. And shout out to Alonzo. Appreciate your comments. Want to make sure I get that in there before we head out. Thank you all. And until next time, again, thank you, Swiper. And we'll keep talking hoops. Take care.